The security camera footage paused at the exact moment her bolt cutters bit into the fence. A champagne flute glinted in her other hand, as if it were some twisted trophy. I watched the screen in stunned silence while the audio played Karen's voice loud and clear. "Nobody uses this dumb field anyway. Might as well put it to good use." She laughed, tossed her perfectly curled blonde hair, and waved her guests through the gap in my reinforced bull fence. That fence didn't just protect my property, it kept 3 professionally trained bulls from wandering into chaos. And she had no idea. Not a clue. What made it worse? Her little party was growing into a full-blown HOA gala. Live DJ. Lights plugged into my emergency power supply. Children darting around. Wine glasses on folding tables. All of it unfolding 50 yards from Diesel, Bruiser, and Tango, animals that could turn that gathering into a rodeo disaster in under 10 seconds. I stood there in my barn office, trying to convince myself I wasn't dreaming. It had been a long weekend. I'd just come back from Amarillo, where I'd spent 2 days performing bull safety demos for law enforcement. These weren't your average farm animals. Diesel had been trained for riot control. Tango had learned crowd avoidance maneuvers during his time at a military base livestock program. And Bruiser, well, he was named for a reason. He didn't like strangers. He barely tolerated me. I designed their enclosure with triple redundant gates and electrified fencing, not for show, but because one slip-up could end in tragedy. And Karen, the self-declared queen of the HOA, just took a bolt cutter to all of it because she thought my land looked like a good place to host a party. I didn't move at first. Just watched as she danced across the boundary line with a cluster of partygoers trailing behind her. She had no permit, no invitation, no awareness of what she was doing. To her, it was just a big empty yard. To me, it was the line between order and chaos. Then I saw something on the screen that jolted me. One of the kids, a boy around 7 or 8, had chased a balloon straight past the picnic tables and was now only a few feet from the inner bull gate. I felt my stomach drop. That gate wasn't meant to be tested. If someone rattled it or tried to climb it, the bulls might think it was part of a drill. They were conditioned to respond to unfamiliar movements. Fast ones. Loud ones. Just like children playing tag. I bolted from my office and sprinted toward the barn. My boots slammed against the dirt path as my mind spun through scenarios. I didn't even have time to call the sheriff. I had to check the animals first. If they were still calm, maybe I could reinforce the gate before anything went wrong. But as I neared the barn, I heard Tango's low, steady snort. He was already agitated. Then came the deep, gravelly rumble of Bruiser's hooves shifting. When I stepped inside, Diesel stood at the gate, ears perked and eyes focused like a soldier awaiting command. They sensed something. Not just the noise, but the breach. Bulls are smarter than people give them credit for, especially trained ones, and when they sense that the routine has changed, they prepare for a reaction. My reinforced gate was holding for now, but I noticed something else. One of the locks looked tampered with. Someone had tried to open it. From the outside, strawberries lay smashed on the ground nearby. Someone had tried to feed them. That wasn't just dumb. It was reckless. I rushed over to the control panel to check the fence system. That's when I got the second shock of the night. An alert flashed across the touchscreen. Auxiliary generator engaged. Power rerouted. That could only mean one thing. Someone had plugged into my backup system, probably the DJ with his blinking stage lights, and overloaded the circuit. The electrified fence that kept the bulls from wandering too close to the outer edge? It was dead. Now the only thing keeping Diesel from Karen's party was a single swinging latch. I grabbed the remote signal controller and a bag of training pellets from the supply cabinet. I wasn't going to wait for disaster to strike. If I moved fast, I could call the bulls back into the inner corral and resecure the barn. But as I turned the corner and reached the open field, I saw it. Diesel had already nudged through the gate. He wasn't charging, yet. He was just standing there, sniffing the air, ears twitching toward the thump of dance music. The crowd didn't even notice him at first. They were too busy laughing, posing for selfies, clinking glasses under string lights that had been taped between trees. Karen stood center stage, posing with two realtors and someone who looked like a local councilman. She was giving a toast, saying something about how this neglected land would one day become a community park. My land. My bulls. My fence. All of it treated like her personal showroom. A few guests noticed Diesel and pointed, thinking he was part of the entertainment. I watched from the tree line, pulse hammering, as a little girl tried to walk up and pet him. She reached out slowly, and that's when Diesel snorted, shook his head, and stomped. The kind of stomp that shook the ground like a warning. A few guests backed up. One screamed. And then, finally, Karen turned and saw him. She gasped but quickly composed herself. She grabbed the DJ mic and announced, "Everyone, calm down. It's all part of the show. Mason, my dear neighbor, has brought out one of his charming bulls to join the fun." Charming. Charming was not the word I would use for a 2,000-pound animal trained to disarm aggressors with a headbutt. I stepped into the open, raised the whistle to my mouth, and gave a short, high-pitched blast. Diesel stopped mid-step. His ears rotated. Another whistle. This one longer, rising in tone. Diesel snorted and turned back toward me. Bruiser and Tango appeared behind him, having sensed the shift. That was good. I still had control. But barely. If someone made a sudden move or loud noise, it could break the fragile tension. Karen, meanwhile, kept talking. "Look how obedient they are. Honestly, I'm thinking of getting one myself. Better than a guard dog." The guests laughed uneasily. A few started edging toward the gate. The DJ, not reading the room at all, started playing some EDM remix of a country song. That's when Diesel did something I hadn't expected. He walked directly toward Karen. Slow. Deliberate. Not charging, just moving like a tank with intent. Karen froze. Okay, funny joke, Mason," she called out, suddenly not so confident. "You can take him back now." But Diesel kept moving, stopping just inches from her party table. He sniffed the stacked champagne glasses, then used his massive head to tip the whole thing over. Glass shattered. Guests screamed. Karen jumped backward and fell straight into her own buffet table. I blew the command whistle 3 times in quick succession. Diesel paused. Tango and Bruiser moved to flank him, completing the triangle formation. I walked toward them calmly, every step a message to the crowd. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a show. This was barely contained chaos. As I reached the bulls and tapped Diesel gently on the flank, I gave Karen one long, hard look. She was on the ground, dress stained with barbecue sauce, staring up at me like I was the villain. I finally spoke. "You trespassed. You cut my fence. You put kids in danger. And you're lucky these bulls respect my whistle more than you respect other people's property." And with that, I walked the bulls back to the barn in total silence. But I already knew. This was just the beginning. Karen wasn't done. And neither was I. The silence after I walked the bulls back to the barn didn't last long. Before I could even relatch the gate, I heard the clatter of heels storming down the gravel. I turned to see Karen, her once pristine white dress stained with sauce, dirt, and what might have been potato salad. She was stomping toward me, clutching her broken high heel in one hand like it was Exhibit A in a courtroom. Her eyes were wild with fury, mascara streaked from the embarrassment more than emotion, and she jabbed the heel toward my chest like it could pierce through the fireproof vest I still wore under my jacket from the rodeo. "You endangered my guests!" she shrieked before I could even say a word. I stared at her, blinking slowly, trying to comprehend the sheer nerve it took to barge onto someone's land, cut through an electric fence, host an unauthorized party, and then accuse the landowner of misconduct. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't have words. I had too many. But none of them would land in a way Karen would ever understand. Behind her, the party was unraveling fast. The DJ was packing up his gear. Some of the guests were already leaving, murmuring into phones and checking their shoes for manure. A few were looking back at us, clearly eager to see how this argument would explode. Karen, noticing the attention, lifted her chin and said louder than necessary, "I'll be filing a full complaint with the HOA about your outrageous behavior." That finally pushed me past the silence. I let out a laugh. One of those low, exhausted laughs you can't hold back when things get too ridiculous. "You're going to file a complaint with the HOA," I repeated, wiping dust off my hands. "After cutting my fence, inviting dozens of people onto private land, plugging into my emergency power, and putting your guests, including children, in direct proximity to trained security bulls." Karen's eyes narrowed like I had personally insulted her intelligence, which, to be fair, I had just indirectly done. "They're animals," she snapped. "You can't just have wild bulls wandering next to a neighborhood." "Karen," I said calmly, "those bulls were in a secure pen, until you broke through the barrier that keeps them, and everyone else, safe." I pointed to the gap in the fence line, where party decorations still fluttered in the breeze. "You created this mess. You're just lucky they didn't react the way they were trained to. If Diesel had charged, you'd be trying to put your buffet table back together with one hand and sipping soup through a straw with the other." Karen went pale for a second, but she was too far into her self-righteous fantasy to back down. "Then you should have warned the HOA. How were we supposed to know you had killer cows locked up next door?" "That did it. They're bulls," I corrected. "And not killers, professionals. More trained than most of the people who'll end up cleaning up your insurance mess when the lawsuits start rolling in." The mention of lawsuits finally shut her up for half a beat, long enough for one of her guests to approach. A tall man in business attire who'd taken his tie off and now looked like he regretted everything. "Karen," he said carefully, "you told us you had permission to use this land." That made her twitch. "Well, Mason and I have always had a cordial relationship," she lied, eyes darting to me. "And this land isn't exactly being used. It's basically just decorative." I folded my arms. "Decorative?" "That decorative land is part of a registered federal livestock certification site. My bulls are trained for emergency drills and security exhibitions. You just held a wine party next to a Homeland Security asset, Karen." She blinked fast. "You're bluffing." "I'm not." I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo of me and Diesel at the Security Expo 3 weeks ago, complete with a Homeland official shaking my hand and a banner in the background. "The only reason they're not here already is because I haven't called the..." The man in business attire stepped back. "I think I need to call my office," he muttered. A woman behind him started taking down her folding table, clearly done with the HOA circus. "And with Karen." "Wait!" Karen shouted after them, but more guests began backing away, embarrassed, ashamed, or just annoyed. One by one, they filtered out. Karen turned back to me, seething. "You set me up," she hissed. "You did this to ruin my event." I blinked again, stunned by how deep her denial went. "Karen, you ruined your event the second you picked up a bolt cutter and thought you were above everyone else." She stomped off, muttering curses under her breath and still holding her broken shoe like a weapon of vengeance. I spent the next hour resetting the gates, checking each latch and sensor, and walking the bulls one at a time through their drills to calm them down. Diesel had taken the whole affair with more dignity than most humans. He leaned against my shoulder gently as I reset the feed system and gave him an extra helping of oat. "You deserve a medal, buddy," I whispered, rubbing his forehead. "Or at least a Karen-proof fence." That night, I reviewed all the camera footage. Multiple angles, crystal clear audio, time-stamped records of when she cut the line and started the party. I copied everything to a secure drive. I didn't know what Karen would try next, but if she went legal, I wanted every single frame locked and ready. The next morning, my phone blew up before I even had a chance to finish my coffee. Messages from neighbors. Some horrified, some apologetic, a few just amused. But one message stood out, a link to a video that had already gained 10,000 views overnight. Someone had filmed Diesel knocking over the champagne tower and Karen falling into her own food table. They added dramatic music. Slow motion. A voiceover that said, "This is why you don't mess with bulls or boundaries." I watched it twice, then laughed so hard I spilled coffee on my porch step. Apparently, someone from the party had uploaded it anonymously. And it was going viral. The comments section was a gold mine of sarcasm and roasting. People were calling Karen Champagne Stampede and Fence Cutter Supreme. Others were praising Diesel's artistic sense of justice. It wasn't just entertainment, it was exposure. And I realized something. Karen had spent years using HOA meetings to bully neighbors, file complaints over lawn length and trash can placement, and act like she owned the entire subdivision. But now? She'd made the one mistake she couldn't spin. She messed with something she didn't understand and couldn't control. And now everyone had seen it. I got a call that afternoon from Officer Gaines, the local sheriff's deputy who'd worked the county fairgrounds for years. "Saw the footage," he said with a chuckle. "That bull of yours deserves a badge. You pressing charges?" I paused. "Not yet," I replied. "Let's see what Karen tries next." Because if I knew her, and unfortunately I did, she wasn't done. Her pride wouldn't let her walk away quietly. She'd find some way to twist this. File complaints, threaten lawsuits, or worse, double down. And I'd be ready. But what she didn't realize yet was that she'd just turned my bulls, and my fence, into local legends. And when you go viral for almost getting steamrolled by a 1,000-pound security bull, your HOA throne doesn't look so secure anymore. 2 days after the party disaster, I received a formal letter from the HOA with Karen's signature stamped proudly at the bottom. She was filing an official complaint against me for creating an unsafe environment adjacent to communal spaces and willfully instigating panic with the use of aggressive livestock. I read the letter 3 times, mostly out of disbelief. Karen had actually flipped the entire incident on its head and painted herself as the victim. It was full of exaggerated phrases like suffered minor traumatic stress, alarming presence of uncontrollable animals, and unsecured property contributing to endangerment. She even claimed her guests mistook the bulls for lawn ornaments, until they moved. That last part made me laugh out loud. Diesel would be offended if he knew. I drove straight to the HOA office that afternoon, not because I expected to get justice there, but because I wanted to look Karen in the eye when I handed them the footage. I wasn't in uniform, but I did bring a copy of my livestock registration documents, bull training certifications, and a highlighted section of state law outlining agricultural landowner rights. I'd also brought the thumb drive loaded with surveillance from 3 different camera angles. Karen cutting the fence, inviting guests onto my land, and the bulls entering the field while she was too busy making speeches. The receptionist blinked when I handed it over. "This is a lot," she muttered. I nodded. "You might want to start at minute 12. That's when she plugs the DJ equipment into my emergency grid. I was halfway out the door when I heard someone whisper behind me, "Is that the bull guy?" Apparently, the video had made its way around the neighborhood. I didn't answer, just gave a polite wave and left. I hadn't planned on becoming a local celebrity, but fate had other plans. That evening, one of the local Facebook groups had a post titled, "HOA Chair vs. Bullman, Who's Really to Blame?" It had more comments than any post in months. Half the neighborhood had turned on Karen, while the other half was just there for the drama. My favorite comment was from someone named Linda J., who wrote, "Anyone who uses bolt cutters while holding a mimosa isn't stable enough to lead an HOA." By the following morning, Karen's narrative had started to collapse. It turned out that several of her party guests, angry that their shoes, outfits, or expensive centerpieces had been destroyed, had contacted the HOA directly. They weren't just annoyed, some of them had believed the party was HOA funded. She had told them the event was officially sanctioned and that costs were covered. One guy said he'd given her $500 toward the food and drinks, thinking it was a charity fundraiser. Another mentioned he'd booked the DJ based on Karen's promise that the land had been donated temporarily by the friendly cowboy next door. That would be me. The cowboy who had no clue and whose bulls nearly turned her buffet into a stampede. Suddenly, people wanted answers, and Karen wasn't giving them. The next surprise came from an unexpected place: my insurance company. They'd received an anonymous claim stating that my animals had terrorized and injured guests during an unauthorized social function. But when I spoke to the representative, she was laughing. "We already reviewed the footage," she said. "Your animals behaved more responsibly than half the humans. We're not honoring the claim." Apparently, someone had submitted the complaint along with a poorly cropped video and fake witness statements. But the original viral footage had already circulated widely, and it was clear who was trespassing on whose land. Things escalated further when I received a call from Officer Gaines again. "Hey Mason," he said, sounding both amused and annoyed. "You might want to know, we got a visit from Karen this morning. She tried to file charges against you." I almost dropped my coffee. "For what?" I asked. "She claimed you threatened her with wild animals. Said you orchestrated the bulls' intimidation tactics on purpose." I laughed. I used a whistle. "They're bulls, not a SWAT team." "That's what I told her," Gaines said. She started rambling about how this was a form of psychological warfare. One of my deputies had to leave the room to stop laughing. "We're not filing anything. But be prepared, she's spiraling." And spiral she did. Over the next week, Karen began campaigning harder than a politician in a tight election. She tried to rally the HOA board to censure me for public endangerment, but more than half of them refused to even show up for the emergency meeting she scheduled. One of them, Sandra, emailed me directly and said, "We're quietly preparing a vote to remove her. You didn't hear it from me." The pressure was clearly getting to Karen. She started leaving passive-aggressive flyers in mailboxes about livestock-related risks to suburban harmony, and began harassing other neighbors about their fence lines and pet permit. She had overplayed her hand, and now the rest of the board was trying to figure out how to distance themselves from the explosion she caused. Meanwhile, I was approached by a producer from a local morning show who'd seen the video. "We want to do a segment on responsible animal training," he said. "And frankly, everyone loves the bulls. Think of it like community education with flair." I wasn't much for TV appearances, but I agreed to let them film a short piece out by the field. Diesel and Tango were naturals. Bruiser mostly ignored the camera, which I suppose was fitting. The segment aired 2 days later and was an instant hit. They even added a slow-motion replay of Diesel tipping the champagne tower, with a voiceover calling it the classiest bull in America. My property, once overlooked, was now widely admired for safety, discipline, and animal welfare. But that brought Karen a fresh problem. Her party guests had now seen that I wasn't some eccentric recluse with wild animals. I was a certified trainer, legally protected, and respected by both media and law enforcement. Her entire complaint hinged on me being reckless, and now she looked ridiculous. Even worse for her, someone leaked internal emails from the HOA system. It showed that Karen had filed a reimbursement request for the party costs under community engagement, listing rental tables, catering, and power equipment which had been plugged into my emergency grid. She'd literally tried to get reimbursed for her illegal gala by using the HOA's maintenance fund. The fallout was swift. The HOA board called a vote within the week. At the emergency meeting, nearly every resident in the subdivision showed up. People wanted blood. Or at least accountability. Karen came dressed like she was going to church and tried to frame it all as a misunderstanding. "I was only trying to bring people together," she insisted. "This is what community looks like." But someone from the back stood up and shouted, "Community doesn't bring bolt cutters." The room erupted. Her attempts at charm fell flat, especially when multiple people confirmed that they'd paid her directly for a ticketed event they assumed was legitimate. A week after Karen's removal from the HOA board, things should have been settling down. And for the most part, they were. The neighborhood finally breathed without her constant notices, surprise inspections, or angry rants during meetings. I could walk out to my field and check on the bulls without worrying someone had tried to sneak in to take a selfie with them. But something told me Karen wasn't finished. People like her don't vanish, they reload. And when a box showed up at my gate with no return address and a note taped to the top reading "Compliments of the Community," I knew it wasn't going to be fruit or cookies. Inside was a collection of torn-up flyers, photos of my bulls with red excess drawn over them, and a fake legal summons, printed on cheap copy paper threatening me with a lawsuit for continued intimidation through dangerous livestock. I chuckled as I set the paper down, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that felt good. It was the kind that came with pressure behind the eyes. Karen was poking the bear, or in this case, the bull, and I didn't intend to let her get away with it this time. I didn't want to drag the matter through court, but if she kept pushing, I'd have no choice. I spoke to a neighbor who worked in county records, and within a few days, he handed me a file. Karen's name was on it, listed as a previous claimant in multiple nuisance complaints around town, none of which had held up under investigation. This wasn't a one-time tantrum. This was a pattern. Still, I didn't want to strike back with lawyers. I wanted something smarter. Something that would make a statement without giving her ammunition. That's when the idea came to me. The bulls didn't just need a reinforced fence, they needed a proper spotlight. I decided to host a public demonstration, not just for training and safety, but to educate the community on the value of what I'd built, and to show exactly how absurd Karen's accusations had been. I sent out invitations to every neighbor, community leader, and local media outlet I could find. I even called the same morning show host who'd aired the last segment. She loved the idea. "Let's call it the Bull Protocol," she said. "Live training. Public safety. Local legend. It's perfect." The day of the event came quicker than expected. I spent the week preparing the field, grooming the bulls, repainting the signs, and installing a temporary viewing area on a raised platform. Diesel, Tango, and Bruiser were ready. They could sense the buzz in the air. I wore my old rodeo vest, polished boots, and the same wide-brim hat I'd worn during my last security contract. But I wasn't playing cowboy today. Today, I was a man with a plan. People started arriving just after 10 in the morning. By 11, we had nearly 80 guests gathered at the edge of the field. A mix of families, press, council members, and even a few curious teenagers from the local school. One of the HOA board members brought folding chairs and passed out iced lemonade. A drone hovered above, capturing the event. At exactly noon, I stepped onto the field and raised my hand. The crowd went quiet. "Thanks for coming," I began. "You've probably all seen the video by now. You know the bulls. You've heard the rumors. But today, I want to show you what they're really trained to do, and why they aren't the danger you've been told they are." I gave the first whistle, and Diesel walked forward and stopped at a marked line. A second whistle brought Tango to his right. A third brought Bruiser. They stood side by side. Calm. Still. Poised. I gave a series of commands, some verbal, some gestured. The bulls moved in perfect coordination, responding to cues, backing up on command, and even forming a wedge formation around a target cone. The crowd watched, stunned. The announcer from the news crew whispered into her mic, "This is better choreography than most halftime shows." Then came the highlight. I stepped toward a mock intruder setup, a mannequin in a red hoodie holding a plastic stick. At my signal, Diesel moved forward with slow, deliberate steps, stopping inches from the mannequin. Another whistle, and Bruiser circled wide, flanking from behind. With one low snort and a nudge from his head, the mannequin toppled. The crowd gasped. It wasn't violent. It was controlled, calculated, and precise. Trained restraint. Exactly what bulls like these were taught for emergency demonstrations. As the applause started, I raised my hand again. "This level of control takes years to build," I said. "They're not pets. They're not wild threats. They're security-trained livestock with certifications recognized by multiple state agencies. They don't attack unless provoked or commanded. And they've never been loose. Not once. Until someone else cut a fence. That line landed hard. A few heads turned toward the back of the crowd, where Karen stood in sunglasses and a visor, arms crossed and jaw clenched. She had come, despite everything, probably hoping to see something go wrong. But all she saw was a flawless routine and a crowd that no longer believed a word she said. I walked over to the podium and invited Officer Gaines to speak. He took the mic and said, "I've worked with these bulls. They're safer than most patrol dogs. And honestly, I trust Mason's judgment more than I trust a lot of humans in a crisis." After TH event, guests stayed for questions and photos. Kids posed next to the bulls, at a safe distance, while volunteers handed out flyers on animal safety, property rights, and the training protocols used. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. I overheard one councilwoman telling a reporter, "Honestly, this should be a regular community event. I'd rather see this than another HOA barbecue." Karen didn't stay. She left quietly before the last question was even asked. But I wasn't done with her yet. I stepped back onto the platform and cleared my throat. "One last announcement before we wrap up," I said. "I want to thank the person who inspired this showcase. Without their actions, irresponsible as they were, I might never have realized how little our community knew about animal safety." I paused and looked around the field. "So this year, I've decided to donate 10% of my training event profits to local livestock education. And I'll be naming our new training area after her, the Karen Containment Zone." Laughter rippled through the crowd. It wasn't mean-spirited. Just cathartic. The name stuck. Within days, someone painted it on a wooden sign near the training field. The HOA board officially adopted the name for the parcel of land, stating it as a community inside joke for the sake of public awareness. And just like that, Karen became a punchline. Not out of cruelty, but because her own actions made it impossible for anyone to take her seriously again. That night, I sat on the porch, Diesel resting nearby, watching the sunset over the newly named containment zone. It had been a long road getting here, and I knew Karen might still have one or two petty tricks left up her sleeve. But she'd already lost her crown, her narrative, and now her mystery. Everyone knew who she was, what she did, and that the only thing she controlled now was whether or not she kept embarrassing herself. As for me, I had bulls to train, a fence to maintain, and a town that finally understood what real security looked like. No flyers. No HOA fines. Just a whistle, a bit of grit, and a 3,000-pound reminder not to mess with the wrong field. 3 weeks had passed since the community showcase, and though the crowd had long gone and the applause had faded, the ripple effects of what happened were still moving through the neighborhood like slow waves on a quiet lake. The sign reading Karen Containment Zone had become a photo stop for locals. People walking their dogs or driving by would often pull over, take a selfie with the wooden marker, and laugh about how a woman's arrogance turned her into living satire. I hadn't seen Karen since the event, not directly anyway. But I could feel her presence lingering, like a shadow that refused to leave even when the sun was high. It wasn't long before another surprise showed up. This time, it wasn't a package, a note, or a fake lawsuit. It was Karen herself, standing at my gate one late afternoon with her arms folded and an expression that tried to say, "serious business," but looked more like a child forced to apologize before dinner. I leaned on the fence and waited. She didn't speak right away. Just stared at me with that familiar mixture of frustration and disbelief, as if she still couldn't accept that the community had turned on her, that she was no longer the one calling the shots, and that the man she'd once dismissed as that cowboy next door had become the neighborhood's new favorite character. Finally, she broke the silence. "I came to talk. Not to argue. Just to clear the air." I raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. I wanted to see how far she'd go without interruption. She glanced at Diesel, who was lying peacefully near the barn gate, his head resting on his foreleg, completely unbothered. "Look," Karen continued, "I know things got out of hand. And maybe I wasn't exactly transparent with the HOA. I let the silence stretch again. She fidgeted. "Fine," she huffed, "I was wrong. About a lot. The party, the fence, the way I handled things. It got out of control, and I didn't expect it to blow up like that." I waited a moment longer before replying. "What exactly are you here for, Karen? An apology? Or damage control?" She looked away, shame flickering for the first time. "Both, I guess. I don't expect you to forgive me. But this whole mess has cost me everything. My position. My reputation. I can't walk down the street without someone making bull jokes. My real estate clients dropped me. I got booted from a local committee I helped start. You don't understand what it's like to have everything flipped upside down over one mistake." I stepped forward, resting my hand on the wooden rail. "One mistake?" I asked. "Karen, this wasn't just one mistake. This was months, maybe years, of entitlement building up until it finally spilled over. You trespassed, endangered children, tampered with electrical systems, and then tried to blame the person you wronged. The only reason no one got seriously hurt was because I've spent years training those animals and preparing for the worst." She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. Multiple choices. And you only came here now because the consequences finally showed up." She didn't argue. She just stood there, face tight, eyes flickering back and forth like she was searching for some remaining piece of leverage, and finding none. Eventually she sighed. "So what happens now? You gonna keep letting people mock me forever?" I shrugged. "That's not up to me. You made yourself the main character in this story. People are just reacting. If you want it to stop, maybe stop giving them new material." That stung. She looked like she wanted to snap back, but had no words left that could punch through the truth. Before she could say more, the gate buzzed. It was the delivery guy dropping off another load of materials for the bull training enclosure expansion. I gave him a wave and turned back to Karen. "We're done here," I said calmly. "I wish you luck, but I don't owe you anything, not an apology, not a retraction, not silence." She turned and walked away without another word, her steps heavier than when she arrived. For the first time, she looked less like a villain and more like someone who had finally realized the world doesn't bend just because she demands it. In the following days, life returned to its quiet rhythm. The bulls resumed their drills. I accepted an offer from a regional security firm to host bi-monthly training seminars using Diesel and the others as demonstrators. More and more people started calling, asking about livestock handling, emergency training, even mentorships. I hadn't planned to turn my quiet land into a full-time operation, but it seemed the community had other plans for me. What was once a target for HOA scrutiny had become a symbol of strength, responsibility, and, oddly enough, local pride. At the next OA meeting, now without Karen's name anywhere on the agenda, I was invited to speak about property rights and safety protocols. It was a surreal moment, standing behind the same podium where she used to preach about hedges being 2 inches too tall. The new board president introduced me with a smile and said, "We figured it's about time we let someone with actual experience and common sense help shape policy." The room chuckled, but I kept it humble. I gave them practical advice, explained my fence systems, and offered to host safety walkthroughs for any resident concerned about living near large animals. I didn't need applause. I just wanted peace. But peace came with one last unexpected gift. The town mayor called me 2 weeks later. He told me that, after reviewing footage and speaking with the council, they'd decided to honor my efforts with a community recognition award. Not because of the bulls, not because of the drama, but because I'd handled the entire ordeal with restraint, logic, and dignity, even when I had every right to lose my temper. Honestly, the mayor said, "You turned a neighborhood feud into a public service. We need more people like you." At the ceremony, I stood beside Diesel, who wore a comically large blue ribbon across his chest and blinked lazily at the cameras. The crowd cheered as I accepted the award. But as I looked around, I noticed one person standing in the back, away from the rest. Karen. Not angry, not plotting, just watching, with arms crossed and a look on her face I hadn't seen before. Regret. Real this time. Or maybe just acceptance. She didn't approach me after. She didn't speak. She just stood there for a few minutes, then turned and disappeared into the crowd. As the sun dipped behind the hills and the crowd started to disperse, I led Diesel back toward the field. The air was still, the kind of quiet that feels earned. I leaned against the post and looked out at the land. Fences rebuilt, community mended, bulls calm, reputation intact. Karen had tried to destroy everything I had, not out of necessity, but out of control and ego. And yet, in the end, she'd done the opposite. She gave me a platform, unintentionally built a legacy, and reminded everyone around us that respect has to be earned, not demanded. Diesel snorted beside me, nudging my arm for a final pat. I smiled and gave him a scratch behind the ear. He turned toward the barn without needing command. I followed slowly, taking one last look at the wooden sign that marked the infamous party's location. Karen Containment Zone. Still funny. Still true. But now, less of a warning and more of a monument. A lesson in what happens when someone underestimates boundaries, literal and personal. And as I closed the barn doors for the night, I couldn't help but whisper under my breath, not to Karen, but to the land, the bulls, and maybe even fate itself. That's how you shut down a party. With patience, with poise, and 3,000 pounds of poetic justice.